Okay guys, one thing that I forgot to mention that's quite important is when you guys are taking the lower control arms off, or you're doing like a conversion. Let me turn off my headlamp. There you go. Always clean the mating surfaces as best as you can. If the lower control arm is sort of in really bad rusty condition, probably a good idea now would be mine's okay, obviously, right? It's a 2018, but if yours is like in really bad rusty condition, probably a good idea to remove it now while you have it. Kind of sand it through or sandblast it or clean it out, give it a nice coat of black paint to protect it and put it right back on the car. There's no really need to get new lower control arm unless you guys were doing some crazy camber stuff. Then I understand the purpose for adjustment. But if yours is just like a bit rusty, don't replace it. Clean it, you know what I mean, and spray paint it nice black and thing. But the whole idea is to make sure that the mating surfaces on the bottom are as clean as possible, because you want the spring to sort of be sitting perfectly on the upper and on the lower part. And it's also a good idea, maybe if you guys want, if you want to go really, really crazy, is to put some NTCs or anything like that. But I don't think that's really required, because the spring is really easy to be removed. But you do want to put NTCs on any of the bolts you put back in the suspension, especially like when we live in Canada, right? So you want to make sure that these, you know, they usually seize up inside there. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that all that is NTC'd on the shocks, obviously, and then on your links here and your thing on your hubs, because you want to make sure that you're able to remove these bolts freely, right? So whenever you guys are removing any kind of suspension, you know what I mean, and putting back suspension in, NTCs, especially in Canada, is your friend. It'll help, you know, remove things later a lot easier, right? So you don't want that bolt to get seized in there and just baked, and you guys are going to have to torch it out and blah, blah, blah. So while you can, NTC's the hell out of it and avoid headaches in the future. But make sure your maintaining services are nice and clean. So we're going to go ahead and put the bag in. Obviously as well, keep it in mind that I'm going to have to adjust the threads in here, because this was adjusted for about 1.5 inch lift. So I'm probably going to bring the threads in about halfway, and that should be a good starting point for me to later adjust it. So that way, you know, when I drop the rear of the car, it has a nice little drop, right? So this is a little bit too much. So probably about halfway through would be good. So always keep that in mind as well. If you put in the bags and the car doesn't drop all the way into the ground, could be two things. One, it could be you have a kinked line, but most likely it's just because the rear shock has to be adjusted a little bit lower. Now keep in mind that you don't want to put these in all the way in, because you want to have some travel, right? If you're going to take the shock body and put it in all the way into the lower mount or the upper mount, you're going to be basically extending out the shock. So it's going to really, really suffer when it comes to dampness and the ability of the shock to travel. You don't want to overextend it or underextend it, right? So you want to have nice movement. So this little piston over here goes up and down. It gives you the dampness, or it gives you the cushion that you require, right? So be careful, because a lot of guys, what they do is, in order to get maximum drop in the rear, they thread these in all the way, and what happens is their suspension suffers, because they think that by putting it all the way in, they're going to get maximum drop. Well, not necessarily, because you will still probably get the same drop if it's halfway through than if it's all the way in. But what you're going to do is you're actually going to deteriorate your ride quality, because the distance is no longer going to be enough for it to dampen through and for the shock to actually go inside and do its job. So be careful, because you might not achieve, you know, it might be pointless for you to thread it in all the way, suffer with your ride quality without gaining any additional, you know, any additional drop that you really need. Whereas if, for example, halfway through, you're going to get the ride quality, but you're still going to get the same drop. So be very careful when you guys adjust these. If you have any questions, you can always leave a question in the comment, and I'll try to respond to your individual answers, because I know when I did the air strut adjustment video, I had a bunch of guys message me in regards to their personal issues, and hopefully I was able to resolve them. So keep watching for tips and tricks, and we're going to go ahead and put the bag in, and we're going to bring both this side and the other side the same amount, about halfway through, and that should give us a good amount of movement for the shock, and also a pretty healthy amount of drop. Okay, so let's run the lines. The backs are already in. We're going to start running the rear lines to connect to the backs. And once we have that, we've opened up the side channel over here to get to the fender vents. 90% of the cars are pretty much bagged the same way. Get to the fender vents or the bumper vents, we'll be able to run the lines for the front as well underneath the car. but this is a critical step. So very simple. First, like with majority of the cars out there, when you're bagging, the center piece gets lifted up. There's a trim piece over there. The side panels are also attached with clips, so you got to pull those out, and then that would allow you to sort of open up this this area over here. Obviously, you got to remove the top cover for over here, and then that will allow you to get to these two clips, which you're going to pull out, and that will allow us to at least fish the wire through, or the lines through, in order to run it to the back bags, and then sort of run the lines underneath here into the trunk. So once we have all the 4 lines, 2 for the fronts and 2 for the rears, congregating in the trunk, then we can run a static air setup, which is probably what I'm going to have to run for a couple of days, just because I don't have time to do the management installation today and the wiring. I'll do that another day. But we're going to run static air. I'll inflate the bag to a static height, and I'll be able to drive around for a couple of days until I get around to doing all the other stuff. But very simple. You don't have to fully remove these pieces, actually. I just found out that on the GTA, there's a 12-volt source here, which is perfect. That's where we're going to be able to run the remote wire. So I don't have to run it all the way to the fuse box. I can run it directly through the 12-volt power, which I believe is turned on with ACC. If not, we're going to test it. And if it is, beauty. I don't have to run a remote wire all the way to the fuse box there. I can run it right from the 12-volt source. I'm still going to have to run the main harness, obviously, to the battery. But that's all part of the kit, so no issues here. So we're going to pop these up, and that should reveal our vents. So there are the vents right there. So we're going to use those to feed the lines to the back, and then going to feed them all the way into the interior. That's all you really need. From both sides. There's some here as well too. Let me just remove this panel, so you guys don't really have to fully remove the interior to run the lines, right? So there's a vent on the other side as well too, behind there. So that's all. So we're gonna run the lines now. All right, so how did I route the lines for the Mark 7? Well, behind the vents from the top, you're able to bring it down through here, go through the frame over here. Obviously, one of them will go directly into the bag here. Super easy for that one. As for the rears, and then continue up behind here, go behind the tank, continue up behind here, where the brake lines are. Remove these shields. Super easy. Run it all the way behind the shield to the front. Like, it doesn't get any simpler than this. I mean, if you've bagged the Mark 7, congratulations, but it's the simplest shit ever in the world. So that's awesome. It's beautiful kind of a car to bag because it's super fucking simple. All right, so same thing for the back here on this side. Run it behind from the vent, going in here, going into the bag. Then again, run it behind the frame over here, all the way through back here, again behind the brake line, as you guys can see, and then going through the shields, bang bada boom, all the way to the front. Like, literally, let's not kid ourselves. Bagging a Mark 7, Mark 6s, Mark 5s, bagging any Volkswagens or even the Audis is the simplest shit ever. The only stuff you're getting into some problems, obviously, with all the Euros is the front, and that's because they have the yoke set up. So you got to do a little bit of jimmy rigging. Don't use any 2x4s or anything like that. Remove the axles, pull it all through, and off you go. But other than that, the rears are super simple. Running the lines on these cars is super simple. So, you know, doing a Mark 7 or an S8 or any of the Euro cars doesn't exactly make you an air suspension specialist, right? The Type Rs, for example, for Honda, the new ones, are super hard to do because they have additional like components in the front. You got to literally pull the axles. Lexuses are a pain in the ass to do. You know what I mean? Other cars are extremely hard to do as well. But the lines are all routed behind here, and I'm just waiting to do the fronts, and that's pretty much it for running the lines. And then the old mate's sort of in the back, over here in the trunk. So I'm going to clean this mumbo jumbo up, and that's pretty much it for running the lines for this car. But going back to air suspension, like exotics, super simple as well. And the reason why that is a lot of the exotics are based on race car chassis. So race car chassis, everything's super accessible. There's absolutely no issue. So, You know, anyone that goes out there and is like, yo, we're air suspension specialists, we bag exotics or electrics or Euros and stuff like that. Like, okay, buddy, clap, 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 but there's a lot harder cars to bag. For example, like the W140, for example, like the Lexuses, as I've mentioned, and some other interesting cars. But that's pretty much it for that. And we're going to go on to doing the fronts next. Okay, so here are the fronts. So looking at the line, I removed this screw and I routed behind the shield, pretty much continuing from underneath. And now this will allow me to sort of have it up here, and then I can connect it to the ladder line once I connect my bag. So we'll move the line away, and I'm going to sort of talk to you guys about how to remove the fronts. So the fronts are pretty easy. Keep in mind that this car is already lowered with a coilover, so the shocks are a lot shorter than actually the factory shocks, right? Which means that the spindle itself just literally slides off. You know what I mean? Whereas if you had the factory shock, obviously the factory shock is a lot longer. About, I would say, a quarter of the shock would still be left in here. So you'd have to basically remove the shaft from the inside over here. And then you'd have to kind of pull it out, wiggle it out, and finally slide out the shock. So it's an advantage if you're going from coilovers to bags, 100%, because you're removing a shorter shock. It's as easy as basically sliding out the yoke and off you go, which is the case that I have here. So that was easy. Basically, the first thing you always do whenever you remove any kind of air suspension or suspension when you're changing the suspension is the end links, especially if you have a sway bar set up. That also only pertains mostly to the shocks that have the end links attached to the shocks. In this case, the VW Mark 7s do have that. So you got to remove the sway bar end link on one side and remove the sway bar end link on the other. What that will do is that will remove the pressure from the actual sway bar, and then it'll give you the ability to drop the arms, and of course it'll give you the ability to remove the shock in the first place. So that's the first thing you should do. Then in my case, all I had to do really is just loosen up the yoke, and then the whole thing slid out. That's it. You know, so it's simple as that. So if you would be doing obviously a removal of the factory shock, you'd have to also remove these bolts underneath. We all know that. So you're able to slide out the lower control arm, so you have a lot more wiggle room. And obviously you'd have to remove the shaft itself, the constant velocity shaft right there. You have to remove those, pull that out, and then that'll allow you the ability to remove the front end. Anyways, all in all, super easy removal and super easy installation on a Mark 7, especially if you have a lift. So as I say again, Mark 7s are not hard to bag. Definitely, I highly recommend you guys that have Mark 7 Golfs. Most of you guys already want to get bagged anyways, so it's just a natural thing to do. But that's all there is for the front. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to remove the Forge Motorsports coilover that I have here, remove it from the top, obviously bolt, and then we're going to kind of take it all apart, and we're going to convert it up using the Squeaky Clean Air conversion bags. Run some ladder lines, connect up to these lines over here. Right now I have the rear bags inflated with static air, so basically they're connected to shorter valves. So these are inflated right here. So we're pretty much good to go in the back. We're going to do the same thing for the front. So we're going to be able to sort of do a nice little sort of look around of how the car drops. I can't wait. I haven't checked the rear how it drops yet, but we're going to do the same thing once the car is fully sort of on static air, and then we'll go from there. So stay tuned. Let's do it up right now.